long list of major banks pitching in to rescue First Republic Bank from failure following the rapid collapse of Silicon Valley Bank just last week. For more on the banking crisis fears and the persistent inflation, we're joined by Madison Ventures Plus principal and University of San Diego research fellow Mitch Roschelle. Mitch, thank you for being here. Let's just start off the bat. You've got big banks now putting in $30 billion to save First Republic, a regional bank. What do you make of this effort to do that by the big banks? And did this process of saving SVB and Signature Bank, did the government just now precipitate the death of regional community banking in this country forever?
Perhaps. So I'll sort of break it down into two pieces. The banks that bailed out First Republic, in full disclosure, I haven't accounted First Republic, but the banks that bailed out First Republic, it was in their interest because it looked like we were sort of heading to crisis 2.0, and none of those banks that bailed out First Republic want a run on their own bank. So I think stemming the floodwaters and trying to calm things down was in their interest. But speaking of big banks, Jamie Dimon famously said after the financial crisis and when Dodd-Frank was rolled out, he said this is potentially the death knell for smaller banks because the onerous restrictions for compliance and regulations that is put on banks, it makes it virtually impossible for smaller banks to comply because they couldn't afford the infrastructure to comply. And I think that's a precursor to where we are today. Which is we're going to have the haves and the have-nots. We're going to have really, really big banks, and it's going to be virtually impossible for small banks to compete.
Yeah, the former FDIC chair, Sheila Bair, said that what the government should have done here is put a full blanket backstop assuring all deposits at all banks, that Congress should have done that instead of just deciding to assure the deposits at SVB and Signature Bank, because what the government has now done is created this environment where normal people aren't sure if their accounts are going to be protected at regional community banks. What do you make of that?
There was a soundbite that came out last weekend, which is not a dollar of taxpayer money will be used. And once they made that, absolute statement, then it sort of precluded Congress from stepping in and doing, Brian, what you just suggested. I sort of pushed back on that comment because if you have the FDIC backstop deposits for one bank and then could lead to two or three, basically those costs inevitably are going to get passed along to depositors and customers of those banks. So the taxpayers are paying for it. But once they cut Congress out of the loop and decided to do this the way they did, we're sort of down a slippery slope of, not enough, and we're probably going to have to do more.
Okay, let's talk about inflation real quick here. 6% inflation right now. The Fed meeting on Wednesday to decide whether or not to raise interest rates. Do you think that they should raise interest rates like the European Central Bank did despite this? Or do you think that they should put a pause given the financial instability of the banks?
I would say no to raising rates. However, the problem is the markets, and I'm not just talking about stock markets, I'm talking about the entire economy, hangs on Jerome Powell's every word. And if he says, I'm going to pump the brakes and not raise a quarter of a point this time, he's potentially signaling that he knows that the banking system is more at risk. So he'll probably go forward, but it's higher interest rates and the rapidly rising interest rates over the last year that contributed greatly to the problem we're in right now.
Mitch, what are you going to be looking at this week, and do you think the worst is behind us? Once you see one cockroach, you know the saying, when there's one cockroach, there's many. What do you make of what we're going into this week?
Well, I had a Manhattan apartment once, Brian, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I live in Florida now, so it's palmetto bugs. But the fact of the matter is, I think we're going to hear more and more stories. And as you said at the top, community banks are vital to small businesses. That's where small businesses do their banking. So I'm going to be looking to see if there's another story in the United States, worse yet, another story abroad, and definitely hanging on every word from Jerome Powell.
All right. Mitch Roschelle, thank you so much for being here on this Saturday. Thanks for your insight.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.